Hey everyone, I'm Eric Rigg. I am an enterprise architect at HashiCorp, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Habitat applications and how they work with Consul. So Consul, let's go a couple here. So I'm Eric. You can find me at eRig on most of the things like Twitter and GitHub and all that. Been at HashiCorp for a little more than a year. And work with a lot of enterprise customers, so post-sales and getting them to adopt our products, so the products that they purchased. So let's talk a little bit about Consul. I kind of wanted to find out like how many of you were familiar with Consul. So how many have actually, okay, good. So I don't have to go through, and I was kind of banking on that, honestly, because I have like 20 slides of like describing of how all this crap works. But I'm not going to go through all that because it's kind of boring and it's the end of the day and everybody wants to go see Mudhoney and have a good time tonight. So I'm going to make it like fun and like we're going to do a demo and we're going to work on that instead of going through all these slides. So Consul, for those of you that don't know, Consul is a tool that kind of sits on top of your infrastructure that provides this layer of networking to provide service discovery and service segmentation, like service mesh, if you will. And so we're going to go through a demo and kind of show you how to build your Habitat applications to be Consul enabled. There's a couple different things that I had to put together to do this, and I've actually got 2 PRs out there that are going to hopefully be merged. I talked to Mandy earlier next week to be able to, so that you guys will be able to do this as well. So I'm going to go ahead and swap over to my laptop, and we'll just go through the demo. Okay, cool. So let me kind of frame out like what this demo looks like right now so that you kind of get an idea of what we're doing. So Consul Server is kind of the core of the Consul networking tool. There's kind of 2 different ways that you can run Consul in a server mode and in a client mode. And what we're going to do here is bring up a server. It's got the UI that's available with it, and the server also stores like all of the Consul states. So all of the services that you're registering with Consul is all stored. All that data is stored in the Consul server in its state storage. So this is just using Docker. I'm just going to use Docker locally, but you can run this in AWS or any cloud or on-prem or whatever. So let me go ahead and bring up the Consul server so we can kind of go through the UI and give you an idea of what it looks like, how it works. This is the, I noticed actually earlier today that they pushed up a new version of this, so that's great, which is kind of cool. So let's take a look at what the Consul server UI looks like. So this is just the Consul service running on a container from Docker Hub. This isn't a Habitat application. We're going to go through all of that here shortly. So this is pretty standard for running Consul. Typically, you run this in like a clustered service. Maybe you'd have it in multi-data center, something like that. But right now, we're just running this all on my laptop. So it's just one service or one server running. So the next piece that we're going to do here is bring up a client. So I mentioned earlier, there's a Consul client mode. So the Consul client used to be in the Habitat core plans, only allowed you to bring up the Consul server. So I had to modify it to actually use the Consul, to actually create a Consul client. What that does is it basically joins with the Consul server and provides this level of like gossip between those different Consul server and Consul client. So it's called Raft, and underlying is actually the SWIM protocol, which we'll talk about here in a little bit as well. But we're going to just bring up the Consul client for this CounterService. So we're actually going to have 2 services that are running here. Total in this particular demo, we're actually going to do 2 demos, but this demo here is just for service discovery. So service discovery, we're just going to try and discover a service from Consul. So we want to figure out what the service is and utilize it, consume it. So first, we're going to bring up the CounterServices, which is the producing service, and then bring up the consuming service, and I'll show you kind of how that works. So we're just going to bring up this, this container here. All this container does is bring up the console client and join to the server. So again, this is a Habitat-built application here. So let's kind of go through what that looks like for the console client. So this is the console client Habitat plan. And all I'm doing is including the console dependency. So this is kind of like, all of these are wrapper plans. So I'm pulling in, right now it says eRig console. Next week, this is gonna say core console. So we can actually pull this console version down and build it. So the workflow that I'm doing here is I'm including this in my plan, and I'm running, because I'm on a Mac, I'm running Hab Studio, enter Hab Studio, build, and then export. So I'm exporting this as a Docker container, but it could be exported as anything else, right? So there's lots of different export. You can even export it as a Helm chart or PCF application, a Cloud Foundry application. But for this demo, we're just exporting it as a Docker container. So this is the console client plan here. So let's take a look back at our server. We just brought up the client, right? So you'll notice that there's no new services. We're not actually bringing up any new services here. We're bringing up a new node. So we've got this node concept of which we have a new Docker container, right? That's our new node that is running console client. So we're running console client and registering with that server. So we've got now two services running together, or sorry, two nodes rather that are running together. But we now need to bring up a service and actually like show you something real. So let's go ahead and bring up that counter service. So this counter service, all it really does is provide a JSON. It's a Go application that is built, again, with Habitat. It just brings up this JSON kind of blob that can be consumed for in a dashboard. So I'm going to bring that up. And while that's coming up, let's take a look at that plan. So here's the plan for that. You'll notice it's a little bit different. It also doesn't include console. So what's nice about this particular scenario is it's pretty common for microservice environments like Kubernetes and others to have a console client that's running, say, on a VM or on a node, and then having services that actually register with that. So you'd have multiple services that would register with that one node. So that's the kind of scenario that we're looking at here, where we've got a container that doesn't include console, but all it needs to do is just register that service with console, and it's now console enabled, if you will. Now, another piece to enable that is using Consul's DNS interface. So the Habitat core plans didn't include a DNS mask plan, so I just wrote one. And it's gonna also be PR'd and available hopefully next week, as long as I get time to actually work on it. Because all my BATS tests are failing, so don't judge me. So at any rate, this is what the plan looks like. So it's a Go application. We're building a Go app. We're using the Go scaffolding as well for Habitat. And then it's got curl. So you're kind of wondering why it has curl. Well, that's how it registers its service with console. So in the post-run hook, we're actually curling our associated console client. So we curl that and we say, here's my service, it's available, here's my health endpoint. And so with that health endpoint, once I bring it up, Consul's gonna keep track of that health. And so let's take a look at the service now that should be running. So we have now a counter service that's running. This counter service is now registered with Consul, and we've got some health checks that are actually passing, which is good. So my demo's working so far. No new nodes, it's just a new service. And then with that, we have really small text of my actual JSON blob, right? So now I want my dashboard to actually figure this out and like use it and display it. So now we're gonna do, just like we did with the counter, we're gonna bring up a console client, but now registered as for the dashboard application. So this will be our 4th container, if anyone's counting. And we're gonna go ahead and bring that up. So this isn't really much different than the CounterService. It's just another console agent that's now going to be serving out for the dashboard application. So if you can imagine like an environment where you have like multiple counter applications that are kind of like scaling up and down, they would be registering with that same console client, or maybe multiple console clients that would then be all the same service name, like counter, right? So you could have like multiple instances of console client, and then multiple instances of the counter application that are registering with those console clients, but really it's all just one service, right? So it's, if those of you that are familiar with like Kubernetes and running Kubernetes, it's like very similar to like pods and nodes, right? So now we have our agent running, and we should be able to see in our nodes, we have a new node. So we now have another console client that's running. So now we want the actual dashboard, like the thing that's really pretty, that's gonna look really cool for you guys. Here we go, bringing up the dashboard, and we'll go through the plan for dashboard as well. But what we're doing here is, you'll notice this piece here. So counting service URL, this particular service consumes its endpoint using a environment variable. It could be other things, a config file, whatever, it doesn't really matter. What really matters here is we're only consuming it based on that service name. We're not looking at an IP address, we're not looking at a load balancer endpoint, we're just looking at that name. That name, and that in conjunction with DNS mask, is then, we're using the DNS interface for Consul to actually grab that service. So now I don't have to put in any sort of environmental information. All I have to know is that I want this service name, and that's it. And this is all put together using Habitat. So take a look at our dashboard plan. So again, the dashboard plan includes basically the same stuff. It's just a different Go application, right? It doesn't include Consul. It only includes DNS mask so that we can actually find out what our service is through the Consul DNS interface. So Consul has a couple different ways that you can actually interface with it. DNS is a really nice, easy way to do it, but you can also do it with the API as well. So now let's look at the pretty dashboard. And now we have a dashboard application that's actually registered with the Consul service and actually consuming that, that counter service, right, using that DNS endpoint. So that's the first demo. That's service discovery, right? So there's this kind of next layer that is kind of permeating into the environment now, this service mesh concept. Being able to figure out what your services are is great, but we also want to be able to secure those services together and make sure that those services can actually, if I have a web service and I have a database service, I want to explicitly tell that web service that it can talk to that database service. And I want to explicitly deny when I don't want it to talk to that database service. And the reason why we want to do this is we're starting to see like lots of different heterogeneous systems running all over the place, right? We've got Kubernetes running over here. We've got these old mainframes running over here. We've got VMs running over here, and in all different clouds. So that's kind of what Consul is really good at, is putting all of that and networking that together. So what we can do now is we can explicitly put those intentions in place to say, I want this web service, I don't care where it's running, whether it's running on Azure or it's running on my own VMware stuff in a closet somewhere, we're gonna be able to connect those together. And all I have to do is say web can talk to DB. But then there's like, what if we have like a middleware piece there, right? So we have a middleware piece that's in between a web service and a database service. Well, we want our web service to talk to middleware, and then we want middleware to talk to database. But now we don't want web to talk to DB, right? We're like, no, we don't want that at all. So we want to explicitly deny that connection. So we can also do that with Consul. And the reason we can do this is using what's a kind of a new concept of sidecar proxies. So each of these services and service instances would have a proxy associated with it. We do also, you can also use Consul, or you can integrate your applications with Consul natively, Consul Proxy. But I'm going to show you what the built-in proxy that comes with Consul. You can also use Envoy. Envoy is a really popular proxy that a lot of people are using now for proxying in service mesh. I'm not going to show you Envoy because I didn't have time to figure that out. So let me show you kind of how this works. But first, I'm just going to kill everything and get everything cleaned up so that we can run this again, but in a service mesh service segmentation environment. So all I'm doing here, just so you know, is I'm just killing all of my services, all those 5 containers that I was running, and then I'm just going to prune all my system, make sure that everything's cleaned and nice and pretty. So now, let's take a look at service segmentation. So this next piece is very similar. We need to bring up a Consul server. It's the same exact Consul server that we were running before. It's pulled down from Docker Hub. It's our official image that we have in Docker Hub. So we're back to square one. We have our Consul service now registered, our Consul server running, and just one Consul service running. So this next piece, let's kind of go through what the code looks like for service segmentation. So I intentionally put this together where the Consul agent is actually running locally on the container itself too. So again, this is all Habitat built. It's just different configurations for that Habitat application. So these applications, this counter application here, again, we'll take a look at the plan. Same kind of plan that we had before, but we're including Consul here. And we're just throwing all of it into one container. And the reason why we're doing that is that this is also a scenario that you may have, where this could be a VM, right? And we're gonna have just one service running on one VM, and we want that service to register with Consul as a pretty common scenario as well. The other reason is the proxy has to run with the service itself. And the reason why you want that is that service is going to now, instead of look at like an endpoint, that's off of that instance, that can't be set up using mutual TLS, using the certificate authority that service segmentation gives you, right? So we want that service to look locally for the proxy, and then between the proxy and the secondary proxy, that there is the secured environment that we want, right? The mutual TLS handshake between those two proxies. So Consul includes its own certificate authority that allows you to connect those two using that mutual TLS connection. So we're gonna go through that and I'll kind of show you. So this plan here just builds the same exact counting service. I do export out the port so that we can see it here, but you wouldn't want to do that because that's not a clean, secure connection because I don't have the TLS connections between my laptop and that container. But I just need to be able to show you that it actually works. So let's go back to our, oh, the wrong one. Here we go. Okay, so we have the server running, sorry. So now we're gonna bring up the counter, the actual counter application. So this one's only gonna include 3 containers, right? We got the server, the counter application, and the dashboard. So you notice there's a few extra log statements here. One that we're like registering this proxy thing. And we're also trying to figure out like, we have TLS, right? So we've got this TLS identity that's also being set up with this particular proxy. So like I mentioned, Consul has its own certificate authority. It issues that TLS certificate to that service and says, now this service is, you give the service the identity versus giving like a VM identity or something like that. So we can take a look now at the dashboard for the server, and now we have this new thing called Consul or CounterConnect Proxy. So this is a proxy service that's now registered with that with Consul that is kind of like that it's that sidecar proxy, right? So when I actually want to bring my dashboard up, instead of saying, oh, I want to look for counter.service.consul, I'm not going to look at that anymore. I'm going to just look localhost. And my proxies now have those configurations to be able to connect to each other. So when I bring up my proxy for my connection on the dashboard, I'm going to say, I want to connect to the counter application upstream and say, I want this counter application with this port number, and let's connect to that instead of counter.service.consul. So we're not using that DNS interface. We're now using the proxy connections between those. So let's go and run the dashboard. If I can find the right. All right. So again, these were built with, these two applications were also built with Habitat. So let's take a look real quick at the Habitat configuration for the dashboard. And again, very similar, except for we're including Consul here. And the other bit that I forgot to mention in the counter was this proxy configuration in the post-run hook. So this configuration here is what allows me to either configure myself as a listener and say I'm a consumer for a service, or I'm a producer for a service. So here we're actually consuming the upstream service, Counter Connect, right? And then on the counter, if we look at the post-run hook, we're saying, hey, listen on this port for proxy connections. So now we've actually said we have a proxy over on the dashboard, we have a proxy over on the counter service. Now let's connect those two together. So now we should have our dashboard service running, and we should be able to see that the dashboard's back up and running. Now I mentioned earlier that you can explicitly deny or approve connections between those two services. The way that that's done is what we call intentions. So those intentions, they can be codified. I'm just going to show you. You can also define them in the Consul UI. And so here we're going to say our source service is going to be the Dashboard Connect service, and our destination is the counter, because that's we're consuming the counter service. And we're going to say we're going to deny this service here. Once I've set that up, I should not be able to connect to that service. And if I go back to my dashboard, I can't connect to that service anymore. So those two services now can't connect because of those proxy connections and the TLS certificate management that's actually going on under the hood. So let's take a look at the logs to show you that I'm actually getting TLS errors now because those two can't talk over TLS, the mutual TLS. They can't accept that handshake. So you're kind of wondering, like, well, why would I want to do this when like Habitat provides a really cool service discovery capability already? I'll give you, in my previous life, we were actually Habitat users, and we used Habitat a lot for building our applications and running in like disparate environments that we weren't really even sure what we were going into. So we said, let's build our Habitat applications and deploy them. We didn't actually do all of our applications like that. We only had some applications that we needed to be able to do that because of requirements for shared objects or something like that. So we instead just built our applications, deployed them out there to out in our system, and other applications we didn't touch. And so what this is meant for is if you're going to use Consul, you can use Consul in your disparate environments, and Habitat certainly like I mean, it's actually a really nice tool to be able to build your applications and deploy them, but not all of your applications they may not be Habitat applications. And you may not actually want to build all of your applications in Habitat. And you don't have to now in order to get service discovery and service segmentation to work. That's what, Consul provides that kind of additional layer that allows you to not have to migrate all of your applications all at once. So let's take one last little show here. We're going to remove that intention, right? So let's go ahead and re-allow that intention so that those two services can then connect back to each other. We go back, and where our dashboard application is actually running again. So that's all I have for you. That's Consul and Habitat. The two PRs will hopefully be merged next week, as long as I get time to work on all of my VATS testing. And then those of you that are Terraform users, I just found out right before I came in here that we finally released Terraform 0.12. So yeah, right. I wish I had a Terraform demo for you, but yeah, so that's great. But yeah, so at this point, do you have any questions about Consul and Habitat? I'm happy to take them. Cool. I know. I want to go drinking too. Right on. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.